When she said goodbye, she expected a reaction, not because she was cruel, but because most men react. They plead, explain, bargain, or break down in an attempt to hold on to what's slipping away. She expected emotion to spill out, for words to rush forward trying to change her mind. What she didn't expect was composure, no raised voice, no desperate questions, no emotional collapse, just a man who listened, acknowledged the moment, and stayed grounded in himself. That calm response changed everything, even if she didn't realize it right away. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted. When a man doesn't beg, chase, or lose control, he communicates something far stronger than words ever could. He shows that his identity isn't tied to the relationship, that his sense of worth doesn't disappear when someone chooses to leave, and that level of emotional control is rare enough to leave a lasting impression. Most people believe that fighting harder shows how much something matters. But respect isn't built through resistance, it's built through self possession. A man who doesn't collapse at goodbye demonstrates that he can handle loss without losing himself. He feels the pain, but he doesn't broadcast it as a weapon or a plea. That restraint signals maturity, strength, and self respect, qualities that don't register immediately but echo later. When a man begs, he places the other person above himself. He makes them the judge of his worth. Once it happens, respect quietly disappears. She may feel sympathy, guilt, or even temporary comfort in being wanted so badly, but admiration fades. On the other hand, when a man accepts the goodbye with dignity, he preserves something invaluable, his frame. He remains centered, not reactive. This doesn't mean he's cold or unfeeling. It means he understands that emotion doesn't require display to be real. He doesn't need to perform pain to prove love. He allows the moment to be what it is without trying to manipulate the outcome. That honesty creates contrast, it challenges expectations, it leaves a question behind instead of a mess. Often, it's only after time passes that the weight of that moment is felt. Silence replaces this drama, the absence of chaos becomes noticeable. The mind starts replaying the goodbye, searching for signs of weakness that never appeared. And that's when curiosity begins, not because he tried to create it, but because he didn't. The man who doesn't chase after goodbye also protects his future. He doesn't say things he'll regret. He doesn't burn bridges out of panic. He leaves the door closed with dignity, not slammed in anger or left ajar in hope. That restraint keeps his self respect intact and his image strong. What she didn't expect was that his calm would stay with her longer than any emotional speech ever could. The goodbye ended the relationship, but it didn't end his presence. Because when a man holds himself together at the moment most people fall apart, he becomes unforgettable, and that is where the ending truly begins. After she said goodbye, he didn't rush to fill the silence with explanations, messages, or desperate attempts to reconnect. Most men feel the urge to speak, to justify, to argue why she should stay or why she was wrong. They try to fix the unfixable in that moment, but he didn't. Instead, he allowed silence to exist, not as a tactic, but as a natural reflection of acceptance. That silence carried a weight far heavier than any words could, and it changed the way she perceived him. Silence after a goodbye is powerful because it creates space for reflection, space for understanding, and space for realization. When a man doesn't chase, explain, or justify, it forces the other person to confront the truth of their decision. They begin to see the calm, steady presence that doesn't collapse under loss. They notice that the man they thought depended on them is not dependent at all. That realization is uncomfortable, but it is also deeply respectful. Most people misunderstand silence as weakness. They assume that if someone isn't arguing, begging, or making noise, they are defeated or indifferent. But the opposite is true. Silence in this context is strength. It shows a man who doesn't need validation from someone who chose to walk away. It shows a man who can feel emotion without being controlled by it. It demonstrates emotional independence, self respect, and inner stability. Qualities that women notice even if they never say them aloud. Silence also gives the mind time to process. She begins to think about what she lost, not in a manipulative sense, but because she is observing the contrast between what she expected and what actually happened. She expected chaos, desperation, maybe even anger, but she received nothing but composure. That gap between expectation and reality plants curiosity, reflection, and sometimes regret. It is in the quiet that the strongest impressions are made because they are felt rather than forced. This silence is not emptiness, it is presence without pressure. It communicates, I am aware, I feel acknowledged, and I will move forward. It doesn't need punctuation marks, emojis, or long messages. It doesn't need to convince her of anything. It simply exists as a testament to the man's strength and dignity. That clarity in action is far more persuasive than any words could ever be. By choosing silence, he also preserves his integrity. He doesn't act out of fear, pride, or ego. He doesn't send indirect messages to elicit guilt or pity. He allows the goodbye to be what it is without twisting it into a lesson or a trap. That restraint protects him from regret, emotional chaos, and future bitterness. And it leaves a lasting impression because she sees a man who responds with alignment, not desperation. Women rarely articulate it, but they sense it immediately. Silence after a goodbye is a statement of self sufficiency. It shows that life continues, that he has purpose beyond the relationship, and that he is not defined by her choice. That quiet confidence is magnetic, and it is the kind of presence that lingers in memory long after the moment has passed. The power of silence lies in its subtlety. It does not scream, it does not demand attention, yet it resonates deeply. And in that resonance, she begins to see him not as someone who could be controlled or manipulated, but as someone unshakable, someone self led, someone worthy of respect. And that is how silence becomes the loudest message. Instead of letting bitterness, anger, or resentment take over after she said goodbye, he chose growth. Most men instinctively look for someone or something to blame. They dwell on the loss, replay the conversation, and allow pain to consume them. But he took a different path. He redirected his energy inward, focusing on becoming stronger, wiser, and better. That choice surprised her because she expected him to crumble, to react emotionally, or to chase validation. She didn't expect him to rise. And that rise became the turning point she never saw coming. Growth after a breakup isn't about showing off or proving anything to the other person. It's about self mastery and reclaiming control over one's life. He didn't post motivational quotes on social media to signal recovery, nor did he seek attention to prove he was fine. His progress was silent, internal, and deliberate. He trained his body, sharpened his mind, improved his skills, and invested in his future. Every action he took was aligned with his purpose, not with a desire to elicit a reaction from her. That kind of growth is magnetic because it comes from authenticity, not ego. Women rarely expect this kind of response because most men react emotionally and unpredictably. The assumption is that the goodbye will leave a man broken or desperate, but when a man redirects his pain into growth, it disrupts that expectation. She begins to notice things differently: the calm in his demeanor, the confidence in his presence, and the momentum in his life. Growth becomes visible not through words, but through actions and energy. It's the silent demonstration that he values himself more than he fears loss. Choosing growth also requires emotional control. He felt the pain of goodbye, but he didn't let it dominate him. He acknowledged it, accepted it, and then made the conscious decision to act. Instead of allowing rejection to define him, he used it as fuel. Every workout, every project, every effort to improve became a step toward reclaiming his life. And as he built his own world, she began to realize that the man she thought she understood was evolving in ways she hadn't anticipated. There's a subtle power in self improvement that can't be faked or forced. Women sense it intuitively. When a man focuses on growth rather than reaction, he communicates strength without needing to say a word. He shows that his identity and happiness are not dependent on our choices, that he can thrive independently, and that he can turn any ending into a beginning. That kind of resilience leaves a deep, lasting impression because it's rare. Most people react, he transforms. The most impactful growth isn't about speed or visibility, it's about consistency and alignment with purpose. He didn't grow to win her back, nor did he grow to spite her. He grew because he respected himself and refused to be defined by someone else's decision. That distinction is crucial. Growth born of self respect, not reaction, is uncheckable. It elevates a man in ways that words, apologies, or displays of emotion never could. By choosing growth, he also reclaimed his narrative. The goodbye no longer dictated the story of his life. He became the author, shaping his path, controlling his energy, and building a future that aligned with his values. And in that transformation, he became unrecognizable to her, not because he was different in personality, but because he was stronger in presence, in purpose, and in dignity. What she didn't expect was that the goodbye would not end him. It became the catalyst for a new, elevated version of himself, and that is the ending she never saw coming. He didn't wait for closure. Most people think that after a goodbye, you need answers, explanations, or some form of validation to move on. She probably expected him to linger, to seek understanding, or to try to extract reasons that would soften the blow. Instead, he accepted the goodbye as information, not as rejection or challenge to his worth. He understood that closure isn't given by someone else, it's created within. By choosing to move forward without needing answers, he reclaimed control over his emotions and over his life, and that autonomy left her unsettled in ways she didn't expect. Moving forward without closure requires emotional maturity. It's not denial or avoidance. He acknowledged the moment, felt the pain, and allowed it to exist without letting it dictate his next steps. He didn't replay conversations endlessly or craft messages to clarify the situation. Instead, he processed internally, accepting that some things have no explanation and that waiting for someone else to provide closure often delays growth. By stepping into his own power, he showed that his happiness and direction were not contingent on her choice. Many men mistake seeking closure for strength. They believe that getting answers or justifications will restore order and protect their pride. But that need often keeps them trapped in emotional loops, dependent on someone else for validation. He broke that cycle. By moving forward without asking for reasons, he demonstrated independence. He respected himself enough to continue living fully, even without her presence or approval, and that choice created respect, silent, undeniable, and long-lasting. Moving forward also means redirecting focus. He didn't fixate on what was lost or what might have been. He invested his energy into his own life, purpose, and growth. Each step forward reinforced that he was not waiting for her to define him, nor was he letting the goodbye dictate his value. That forward motion is magnetic because it conveys stability, resilience, and self-reliance. Traits women instinctively recognize and respect, even if they never voice it. There's also a subtle power in not needing closure. It challenges expectations. She expected him to react, to ask, to linger. Instead, he moved quietly, steadily, And that contrast makes the impact deeper than any argument or emotional appeal ever could. The act of moving forward without dependence communicates a level of self possession and strength that is rare. She may not understand it immediately, but over time, the impression lingers because it cannot be ignored. Emotionally, this approach shields him from unnecessary pain. When closure is sought externally, disappointment is doubled if the answers don't align with expectations. By taking ownership internally, he preserves his energy, his pride, and his ability to continue building a life that matters. The goodbye becomes a point of reflection, not a wound to dwell on, and that shift transforms the narrative entirely. He also demonstrates that he is not defined by endings. A goodbye is a moment, not a verdict on his worth or potential. By moving forward without closure, he reframes the story. He becomes the author of his life, choosing direction, purpose, and focus over reaction. That autonomy elevates him in ways that are quietly shocking to someone who expected dependency or despair. What she didn't anticipate was that he wouldn't need her explanations to thrive. He didn't seek validation, he didn't linger, and he didn't allow her choice to control him. And that is the unexpected ending she never saw coming. He became unreachable, not out of anger or spite, but because he understood the power of distance. Most people think being unavailable after a breakup is a punishment or a game, but that's not what this was. He didn't block her out of revenge, nor did he make himself scarce to manipulate her feelings. Instead, he filled his life with purpose, direction, and momentum, creating a version of himself that was fully occupied and fully aligned with his goals. That kind of presence, abundant yet unavailable, commands respect in a way that desperation never can. Becoming unreachable is about more than just physical distance. It's about emotional and energetic alignment. He didn't respond immediately to messages, he didn't chase explanations, and he didn't try to recreate what was lost. He honored his own time, energy, and priorities, showing that access to him was no longer automatic. That unavailability was not coldness, it was a demonstration of self respect. She could feel the shift even if she couldn't put it into words. The man she thought she could influence was now operating independently, and that realization unsettled her in ways she didn't anticipate. Most people misunderstand this concept because they equate unavailability with neglect. But true unavailability after goodbye isn't neglect, it's self possession. It's about building a life that doesn't wait for validation from anyone else. He didn't fill the void with distractions or social performances. He genuinely engaged in growth work. That alignment between actions and purpose radiates authenticity, which is far more compelling than any attempt to seek attention. It's magnetic because it's real. This shift also reframes memory. When someone becomes less accessible, it creates contrast. She remembers the moments of connection, but now those moments exist alongside a man who is no longer at her disposal. That contrast deepens the impact of his presence. She begins to see the gravity of what she let go, not through guilt or manipulation, but through observation. The man she thought she could influence now defines himself entirely on his own terms, and that is both humbling and striking. Becoming unreachable in the right way requires discipline. He could have reacted with jealousy, anger, or attempts to reinsert himself into her life. He could have sought revenge or validation. Instead, he chose a path of dignity and forward motion. He became fully immersed in the life he wanted to create. Letting actions replace words, that choice communicates emotional strength, independence, and self leadership, all of which are deeply respected qualities. It's important to note that this unavailability is not emotional detachment. He remains present in the sense that he is engaged in life, relationships, and responsibilities, but he does not allow her goodbye to dictate his emotions or actions. He creates boundaries naturally, and in doing so, he demonstrates that respect is earned through behavior, not demanded through reaction. She may not realize it at first, but over time, the absence of desperation and the presence of growth leaves a lasting impression. By becoming unreachable, he also controls the narrative. He isn't chasing, explaining, or negotiating the terms of his worth. He doesn't allow the goodbye to define him or reduce his value. Instead, he elevates himself, taking ownership of his life and energy. This self leadership is rare and it forces reflection. She begins to see him as someone who cannot be controlled or swayed by emotional drama, someone who commands his own reality, and someone who has grown beyond her departure. What she didn't expect was that he wouldn't be waiting or reacting, that he wouldn't be desperate for validation, and that his absence would make his presence even more significant. And that is the ending she never anticipated. The most powerful part of this story is the ending she never expected, the realization that her goodbye didn't destroy him and upgraded him. Most people assume that a breakup leaves a man weakened, emotional, or desperate to reclaim what he lost. She expected him to linger in pain, to beg, or to try to win her back through words or actions. What she didn't expect was a man who used the goodbye as a catalyst to elevate himself, a man who turned an ending into a new beginning without bitterness, without drama, and without regret. That transformation is the ultimate lesson in self-respect and silent power. After she walked away, he didn't wallow or obsess over what could have been. He didn't replay every word or search for ways to manipulate her feelings. Instead, he focused on himself, on growth, purpose, and alignment with his life goals. He understood that the end of a relationship is not a verdict on his worth. It's simply a turning point. By choosing forward motion over stagnation, he transformed the pain of goodbye into fuel for becoming a stronger, wiser, and more grounded version of himself. This is a kind of strength that women rarely see but instinctively respect. She didn't expect that he would carry himself with dignity throughout the aftermath. Many believe that emotional pain must be displayed to be validated, but he proved otherwise. He acknowledged the moment, allowed himself to feel, and then acted with restraint. There were no desperate messages, no attempts to explain, no public displays of sorrow. Every action was deliberate and aligned with self respect. That quiet confidence communicates more than words ever could. It shows mastery over emotions, clarity of purpose, and the ability to remain unshaken regardless of circumstance. The transformation was also visible in his lifestyle. He redirected his energy into meaningful pursuits, whether it was work, fitness, learning, or building relationships that uplifted him. His life became richer, fuller, and more focused, not because he was trying to impress anyone, but because he understood that his value comes from within. This kind of visible growth creates a magnetic effect. She begins to notice, consciously or subconsciously, that the man she thought she left behind no longer exists, and the man who stands before her is elevated, independent, and unshakable. There is also a subtle psychological impact in this type of ending. She realizes that her choice did not define him. He did not allow her goodbye to control his identity or his future. That realization is profound because it challenges her expectations. She may have assumed that walking away would hurt him deeply, that he would chase or struggle. Instead, she sees someone who has not only survived the goodbye but thrived because of it. This reversal of expectation is disarming and commands respect without a single confrontation. This ending also demonstrates the importance of self-leadership. He didn't wait for closure, explanations, or validation from her. He didn't allow resentment or regret to fester. He created his own closure internally and took ownership of his life. That level of self-reliance is rare and transformative. Women may never voice it, but they recognize the power and integrity behind it. Respect grows naturally when someone witnesses strength and growth that are entirely self-directed. By the time she reflects on what happened, she understands something crucial. The goodbye did not end him, it allowed him to become more. He did not compromise his values, chase validation, or succumb to emotional chaos. Instead, he used the ending as a beginning, walking forward with dignity, purpose, and an unwavering sense of self, and that is the ending she never saw coming.